Thank you. Thank you very much. As a graduate of Gilbert School, along with my other sisters and brother, we're very happy to be here. Although this is not the original building, it is the inheritor of the tradition of the Gilbert School. This is a historic day for the opening of the first law museum of any kind in North America. Out of 35,000 museums, this is the first law museum. And I think it's a historic day for our country. And it's very fitting it is in Winston, Connecticut. People have asked me in the years of building this effort, why isn't it in Washington? Why isn't it in New York? What about Boston? And I say, what's wrong with Winston? Why shouldn't it be in Winston? Why should everything be in the big city? This is the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, Massachusetts, Naugatuck Valley. This is where workers gave their lives for their company involuntarily, where they got injured and maimed and sick and never had a remedy to go to court in the 19th century. Almost zero. But enough judges and plaintiffs and lawyers brought case after case, decade after decade. So now we have the finest civil justice system in the world with all its limitations and all its adversaries to weaken it. There is no civil justice system in the world that systematically allows a patient who's wrongfully injured, whether as a consumer of a defective product or a hazardous pharmaceutical or toxic exposure in the workplace or malpractice, they can on their own decide to go to a lawyer, an attorney, on a contingent fee, which means that the attorney only gets paid if the attorney wins for you. Wouldn't we like to have doctors bill us on that basis? And then they go to a court of law. They don't have to beg. They don't have to, do what we all have to do to get something out of our state legislators or our executive branch. They're in a court of law protected by the Constitution and a whole set of procedures. It doesn't matter who they are. They may hate tort law, but if they're wrongfully injured, they get the full benefits of it. Doesn't matter who they are. It's a universal access to justice based in the 7th Amendment of our Constitution. Other countries who do not have this kind of deterrence, this kind of accountability, this kind of compensatory justice, have unsafe societies. They have more unsafe societies. Buses go off cliffs in Brazil and Mexico because the perpetrators are not required to absorb the costs of their negligence or criminality and decide, well, it's better to be safe because it's cheaper to be safe than unsafe, because we're going to be hauled into court, we're going to have to pay up, maybe punitive damages as well. So I also want to welcome some students here from, as they said years ago, a faraway land, who are students here at the Gilbert School from China. And I want them to answer in English their answer to the following question, out loud, so you can hear that they're here. 你说中国话吗? Yes. There you are. 谢谢. And we hope that they'll go back home knowing about the civil justice system. Maybe one of them will start a law museum in China. Furthermore, it's important to know that every culture has styles of violence. Some are given a lot of attention, some of a far more serious impact are ignored. The difference is, where does one form of violence come from? If it comes from the weak or the deprived, they're going to get much more focus. We have not been accustomed to ask our legislators, what's your policy on corporate crime and violence enforcement? And far more death, injury, and disease comes from negligence or worse, from corporate misbehavior. And that's all very well documented by established institutions like EPA, Harvard School of Public Health, and the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, among others. We have a wonderful program for you. People in the audience and on the stage here are very accomplished, very wise. They've made great contributions, and you're going to hear from some of them. First, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the American Museum of Tort Law, which I urge all of you to view if you can't see them, the exhibits today, maybe in the succeeding weeks, or the open house tomorrow for local visitors if they would like, bring their families. He is Richard Newman. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin Law School with honors, came to Connecticut, where he was from, practiced civil justice law for a number of years, started his own firm, and had time to be a co-author of the treatise on tort law for the state of Connecticut, a very detailed work. And we're very happy to have him with us because he not only brings these credentials, he brings tremendous enthusiasm and vision as to what this museum is going to expand into and reach throughout the country and the world in an internet age. So I give you Richard Newman.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am honored to stand before you. I am honored, truly honored, to stand before you as the Executive Director of the American Museum of Tort Law, opening today here in Winstead. I want to start with the Academy Awards part of the program, where I very quickly thank all of the people who have made this possible. Ralph Nader, who you all know, has been a tireless advocate for justice for many years. He had the vision that led us to this day. I must also thank the founders, the men and women who had shared this vision and have given generously to make it a real museum right down the hill. Professor Joe Page from Georgetown, who selected and curated the cases that define and delineate the landmarks in tort law. Art Malella from the Smithsonian Institution has been an invaluable consultant. Jerry Eisterhold and Eisterhold Associates designed these exhibits. Maltby installers installed them. But there were a number of individuals who have worked tirelessly and heroically to get this museum built and to bring us together today. Charlene Lavoie, the community lawyer in Winstead. You know, we're going to be here all day if you're going to keep clapping. I'm prepared to do that. Claire Nader. Bill Coldis, John Richard, Selena West, Cecilia Petricone, Jean Bauer, Lee Thompson, Nick Randawa, Sylvia Cancella, Doug Clement, Janice Roy, Anthony Semino, Wizard of the Web, Allison Torres Bertka, the skilled journalist who has written many of the articles that are on our website, Lee Howard, graphic designer extraordinaire, the Methodist Church and Reverend Florence Edens, who have been good neighbors and were kind enough to let us use their church this morning, the Gilbert School, Headmaster Anthony Serio and Principal Alan Strauss, and the people of Winstead. And I also, well, okay. And I thank all of you for attending this convocation celebrating the opening of this unique, unprecedented institution, the American Museum of Law. The museum seeks to increase citizen understanding of tort law, which is the law of wrongful injury, and the role that this body of law plays in the protection of personal freedoms and safety. And more, visitors to the museum will learn about the critical importance of the right to trial by jury enshrined in the Bill of Rights, the 7th Amendment to the Constitution, Trial by jury is the best, fairest system for resolving disputes that humankind has ever devised. Come to the museum, and you will see in an entertaining format the cases that have shaped our lives by protecting our health and safety and welfare. And as you explore the museum, you will see how the law has grown and adapted and changed as society has grown and adapted to change. And that is a never-ending process. As new developments come along, the law will grow and adapt and change to ensure that justice is available and accessible to all of us. I am honored to serve as the executive director of this museum, and with your support, this museum will long stand as a voice in support of those two bulwarks, tort law and trial by jury. We have an interesting and excellent program. I want to thank all our speakers. Thank you again. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. I would like to introduce now Art Malala, who spent many years with the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. He just retired. He was the founder of an important wing of the Smithsonian, which is the Lemelson Center on Innovation and Invention. And he left it in a very effective and prosperous way to be a beacon to young people as well about the importance of creative thinking. This museum is a design breakthrough. One of the reasons why there are no law museums is it's hard to visualize the law other than putting parchment beneath glass structures. This museum is a museum of visual communication. It uses art as a form of education, which means it has to excite in a legitimate manner. It has to inform. It has to arouse the curiosity. It has to get the visitors to say, I want to see more, or I disagree with this result, or this is a marvelous result. It never occurred to me the judge and jury would come out this way. The nice thing about it, it relates to your everyday experience. People drive cars, they receive medical treatment, they take medicines, they work in workplaces that may not be safe. They are exposed to the risks of an industrial society. And when those risks are considered unreasonable, that's when the law of torts moves in to deal with negligent, gross negligent, or even criminal behavior that violates people's health, safety, and property. Art Malala has had a long career in using museums as educational instrumentalities. And the interesting thing about this is that this is not an old tradition. Museums many, many years ago used to be rather static, and they didn't excite so much as maybe invoke some historic awe to see some scene of a battlefield that we read about in our courses. The interesting thing about Art Malala, and you'll hear him in just a minute, is that he has thought about the purposes of museums. And I think he's going to think even more because of his engagement with the American Museum of Tort Law, because it breaks through some very important frontiers. And I give you Art Malala.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for that kind introduction. I have to say it's a thrill to be here today, and it's been a thrill to work over the past years with Ralph Nader, an inspiring leader of the team and the team. And it's been a big learning curve for me. I'm an outlier in some ways, in other ways not, but it's been a big learning curve to learn about tort law. Now I'm ready to sue when the time comes. Now, so what a museum is and should be, well, that's a tall order for an hour, and I've got a few minutes to do this in. So what is a museum? Now, there's a range of definitions, but here's a basic one of the International Council of Museums, an authoritative source. Quote, a nonprofit, permanent institution in the service of society, and its development, open to the public, which acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. Okay, there's a basic definition. Where do we go from here? Beyond that, it's not easy to say what a museum really is these days. There are all kinds of museums, from the lofty and venerable Met, the Louvre, the British Museum, all the way down to a button museum, maybe not all the way down, but to a button museum, and a museum that is hoping to come into existence on Liberace in Las Vegas. So you might be thinking from the sublime to the ridiculous, but I guess they all serve some component of society in some way. Fortunately, in the United States, there is a growing number of museums devoted to human rights, including civil rights, minority rights, women's rights, LGBT issues, justice, the Constitution, tolerance, the Holocaust, to defenders of various heritages. Now, joining that, we're very fortunate to have the American Museum of Tort Law, which, as we've heard, will be the nation's first law museum, not to mention the first devoted to tort law. Now, we know that museums have been a growth industry, and they're super popular organizations. According to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, get hold of these numbers. There are 850 million visits to American museums per year, more attendance than all of the sporting events and theme parks combined. So, needless to say, they're not only popular, they're influential, and they should be. Here's where the should comes into it. The other interesting thing is every survey shows that museums have enjoyed very high levels of public trust. According to a study by the American Alliance of Museums, I'm throwing a lot of statistics at you, but I think they're interesting ones, and Indiana University, they are, paraphrasing, one of the most important resources for educating our children and one of the most trustworthy sources of objective information to the public. They are considered a more reliable source of historical information than books, teachers, or even personal accounts by relatives. They are judged trustworthy by 87% of the respondents, while books were judged trustworthy by only 61%, and television news by only 50%, and I think that's dropping. So this is as it should be, being a museum person, I think. But we have to guard this trust. We have to safeguard this trust. Why? It's an interesting book that was put out in 1999 by a man named Stephen Dubin called Museums as Displays of Power. And Dubin argues pretty convincingly that museums have strong political agendas, though they may be hidden political agendas. They're hidden displays of power. And he's really talking about imbalances of power, and he's speaking here about money power, for one thing, corporate power, having their way with museums, colonial powers, and he cites the British Museum as one. It's one of my favorite museum in the world, but it's a colonial museum in many respects, and that's been challenged of late, but it still stands. So there's a power relationship being explained in museums. So the implication here is you better be prepared to look below the surface and, caveat emptor when you come to museums. Now, I think it's just really kind of wonderful that the American Museum of Tort Law turns that power equation on its head, as it should. It's a bottom-up story at this museum, and I'll say our museum, I feel so much part of that. It's about David's slaying Goliaths, and you will see that today. Now, because of this trust, people care a lot about museums. This often leads to controversy. Now, this seems contradictory to you, it may, but controversy is a measure of that trust. The subject of tort law, as I'm sure you know, is inherently controversial. There are winners and there are losers. Tort cases always hit us very close to home and in the pocketbook, personally, our health, and therefore they can spark some pretty incendiary public passions. So we should expect some spirited debate and controversy with museums in general and with this museum as well. Controversy is ubiquitous in today's museum world, and I challenge you to open a newspaper or get on any Twitter feed and not see some controversy looming on the horizon or raging in some way or another. It's everywhere, and really what counts is how you react to it and what you do with it. Now, don't get me wrong, controversy can get you in a whole lot of trouble. Having worked at the Smithsonian and witnessed the notorious 1995 Enola Gay debacle about the B-29 that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, the exhibit was canceled because of the controversy. I know firsthand, and it's not fun. A museum director was fired over that debacle. In the case of the artist Mapplethorpe exhibit, a museum director was actually let off in handcuffs. Now, we hope that this doesn't happen to Rick. Rick agrees. So it can be very scary, but I want to just say a few more words on behalf of controversy at a museum. As I said, controversy means people care. It signals engagement and debate is at the very heart of our democratic society. Controversy means that a museum is taking risks. And to quote Martin Roth, the director of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, museums have to take risks. We have to face the public or risk being irrelevant. Now, is the public ready for this, for a museum to continue in this role, to forge ahead in this role? Well, interestingly, according to a 2013 study commissioned by the Museum Association of the United Kingdom, the survey revealed a high level of trust and positivity toward museums and a widespread perception that they have a broader role to play in society above appealing to individual visitors. But there's a flip side to this. The survey also showed that the public was actually reluctant to see museums expand in these kinds of territories, to expand beyond what they considered their core duty of preservation and presentation. And why? Well, let me explain what they're reluctant about. They're reluctant to having museums fostering a sense of community. It seems very odd. They're reluctant to have museums help the vulnerable, to protect the natural environment, to providing a forum for debate, promoting social justice and human rights. Why? Now, the authors of this study were puzzled too, and they contend it's because the public cares so much about museums that they fear such activities within museum walls will undermine their stature and threaten their very existence in today's very precarious and sometimes warring cultural environment. So here is the biggest should that I'll end with. And the American Museum of Tort Law should not shrink from social engagement. And I have every confidence that under our leader, Ralph Nader, that will never happen. Social engagement is the very raison d'etre of museums today. And I think the American Museum of Tort Law should lead and inspire in the future. Well, let me just add one coda on behalf of the exhibition team and Ralph in particular. I want to close with a few words about Benjamin W. Lawless, who partnered with Jerry Eisterhold of Eisterhold Associates in the design of this museum. Sadly, Ben, a good friend and inspiration to all of us, my longtime colleague at the Smithsonian, did not live to share the joy of this day. But he was in many ways a guiding spirit, endlessly creative, joyful, fearless, yet whimsical. As a pioneering designer at the Smithsonian, he faced myriad challenges, yet he faced them all with determination, grace, and a chuckle. Ben is the one that showed us all to how to take this very serious and important subject and make it exciting, inviting, and even playful to visitors, to invite them in and to invite them to engage. Ben's spirit guided us to this day and will continue to sustain us in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arthur. It's my pleasure now to introduce one of America's great historians, Eric Foner. And I say that because historians have often never conveyed the most important aspect of their mission, which is if we don't know history, and if we forget history we once knew, we're going to be condemned to repeat it. We often look down on the ancient wisdom of people centuries ago as if they don't matter anymore because they don't have modern technology and smartphones. History is what we have left. And when I speak to students who don't like to take history courses, I say, where would you be if you didn't know anything about yourself except the last 3 months? Where would you be? And so it's true for cultures and societies. Eric Foner is a professor of history at the Department of History at Columbia University. He has just come out with a remarkable study on the Underground Railroad and the Civil War. His specialty areas are in the Civil War, before and after and during the Civil War. And it was suggested to him by a student of his who discovered some archive of a reporter in the 1850s that was buried in some dark corner of the Columbia University Library. And the archive had interviews of people who fled the South as slaves and related their experiences. That's just part of Eric Foner's value as a teacher, because he respects his students, he spends time with the students, and even though he's nationally known and invited on national television, he never forgets that the first duty of a teacher is his students. His book, called The Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln and American Slavery, won the Pulitzer Prize, the Bancroft and Lincoln Prizes in 2011. That's like winning the Super Bowl, only it's more important. He's a neighbor. He has a home in Colebrook, as well as New York City. And I think people who are teachers in this area are missing a bet if they don't invite him to speak to students sometime throughout the year. Of course, you know, he's had a broad educational background, a PhD from Columbia University, a BA first class from Oriel College, Oxford University, and a BA from Columbia College. One last point, there is a slavery museum that just opened a few months ago in central Louisiana. It was established by a trial attorney who I think had ancestors who might have been slaves, and he wanted to make amends. And he did a tremendous amount of research, and it's now available exactly on a plantation that was known to be a brutal slave plantation, whose acreage he bought and established the first slavery museum, which might be considered the ultimate tort. The ultimate tort. Eric Foner.
Thank you. Thank you, Ralph. It's an honor to be asked to participate in this event today, marking the opening of the American Museum of Tort Law. To be sure, as one who was used to lecturing at Columbia in class sessions of an hour and a quarter, I found being admonished that I must speak for no longer than 5 minutes disconcerting. But then I reflected it only took Abraham Lincoln 2 minutes to deliver the Gettysburg Address. So succinctness is a challenge, but also a virtue. Lincoln, by the way, made his living, as you know, as a lawyer, and while tort law was quite new when he began his practice, some of his cases revolved around torts, injuries, including a famous case involving damages caused by a newly constructed railroad bridge over the Mississippi River that obstructed river navigation. Lincoln, by the way, represented the railroad company in this case. Museums like this one are sometimes called instances of public history. They bring the fruits of historical scholarship and experience to a broad audience. They're essential to educating citizens in our democracy. That's why this new museum is so important. Now, I'm a historian, not a lawyer, not a law professor, but I know that historically, tort law has been the weapon of the weak, the disadvantaged, the injured. In a country where a look at any daily newspaper will convince you that in actual practice, there is one law for the rich and another for everybody else, where bankers and corporation executives guilty of malfeasance walk away scot-free, where cities like Ferguson, Missouri, which was in the news last year, balance their budgets by inflicting fines in court on their poorest residents, a tort law can be a great equalizer. It embodies, among other things, our commitment to the idea that crimes and private injuries should be adjudicated not by a secret tribunal or a lone judge, but by a jury of one's peers. The principle of trial by jury, as we heard long ago, helped to inspire American resistance to British laws and eventually the movement for our independence. To illustrate my point about tort law, let me briefly allude to two more recent uses of tort law that are not, at least so far, illustrated in this great museum. During the 1980s, Morris Dees, an attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center, developed an innovative strategy of using tort law to publicize and punish the depredations of violent hate groups, of which, unfortunately, there are quite a few in this country. Too often, local officials proved reluctant to file criminal charges against such organizations. Dees represented minority clients who filed claims for injuries not only against individual perpetrators, but against the organizations themselves, winning damage judgments that drove a number of neo-Nazi groups into bankruptcy. For example, he launched a tort suit against the Ku Klux Klan in Mobile, Alabama, on behalf of the mother of a victim of their violence, and won a $7 million judgment which bankrupted the United Klans of America. In 1990, a jury in Portland, Oregon, awarded $12 million to the relatives of an Ethiopian immigrant who had been assaulted by members of the White Aryan Resistance, leading to the dissolution of that hate group. So tort law is always expanding and does offer weapons for people who otherwise are very disadvantaged in this country. The second illustration comes from the work of a colleague of mine, David Rosner, a professor at the School of Public Health at Columbia. For the past several years, he's drawn on his scholarly research to take a leading role in efforts using tort law to make paint companies shoulder responsibility for decades of promoting the sale of lead-based paint, long after research demonstrated that imbibing dust or chips of that paint can cause serious brain damage in children. Rosner has helped individuals win compensation for injuries and helped states and municipalities to force these companies to provide money to remove lead paint from the walls of homes. Lawyers are frequently pilloried in Congress and the press for pursuing such cases, but without this kind of litigation, no one would ever have seen the internal memos demonstrating that companies were well aware of the danger posed by leaded paint to children, or how they devised advertising campaigns to counteract public concern as such knowledge became available. In other words, tort law helps to rebalance the scales of justice in favor of the poor, the weak, and the disadvantaged. So let me congratulate Ralph Nader and Winstead itself on the creation of this remarkable museum, which will make a broad public aware of the importance of this vital part of our legal system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew F. Popper teaches torts, administrative law, a seminar on government litigation, and administrative law at American University's Washington College of Law. He is a prolific author who has written more than 100 articles, books, and scholarly papers, among them Materials on Tort Reform, published in 2010. And he has also written 2 novels. He has served as the Associate Dean of the Law School, was the 2010 recipient of the American University Scholar Teacher of the Year Award, and the 2010 Baldwin Wallace Outstanding Alumni Award. He has won university awards for teaching and numerous other professional accomplishments, and was the recipient of the American Bar Association Robert B. McKay Award for Excellence in Tort Law. But Andy is more than simply an ivory tower professor. He has also served as a consumer rights advocate and pro bono counsel for the Consumers Union of America, testified before congressional committees, and authored amicus briefs before the United States Supreme Court. He holds an LLM, a master's in law, with highest honors from George Washington University, and a law degree, a Juris Doctor with honors from DePaul University. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Andrew Popper.
It's not unusual when you're introduced like that to say, I wish my mother was here. Somebody said it this morning. But my sister is here today, and I'm really glad you heard that. So I'm not just that little guy who used to give you trouble when I was a kid. 5 minutes. How many of you in this room have been in a position where you had to say the most important things about the most critical pieces of legislation in 5 minutes? Raise your hand. Okay? My topic, what's important about tort law, has already been covered by everybody. And I thought I'd focus for a second on the following, who you are. I look out on this audience and I'm stunned. This is a full house. My students are required to come to my classes because they're required, and there are two very big differences. One, they're not paying anywhere near as close attention to what I'm saying as you are. And two, I can see your faces. I never see their faces. You come in, they come in, their laptops go up, that's all you see. All of my students are named Apple or Dell. I see Alan Morrison, I see Victor Schwartz, Joanne Darrochow, Ralph, Michael Rustad. This room is full of people who understand that tort law is that last great bastion of individual liberty, of justice. This is where we come when things go wrong. When the air we breathe is poisoned by Volkswagen and our cars blow up by General Motors. When things don't work well, when teachers abuse students, when the world goes wrong in a family, who are you going to call? And the answer is, you're going to turn to this system that you said, oh, those tort lawyers, oh, those personal injury lawyers, they're making all the money, what scoundrels they are. Well, when things go wrong, it's your lawyer who is your hero. In my view, and it is, I hope, the view shared in this room, tort law is about justice. Tort law is about fairness. It is about the hard stuff of accountability. It's about the necessity of a certain level of uncertainty. What's the award going to be? What are the damages going to be? How's that going to affect us? And that uncertainty, since you don't exactly know what's going to happen, leads to incentives. And those incentives are what produces deterrence. So tort law isn't just about individual justice. It's about making the world and this country a safer and better and more efficient place. I've devoted most of my career to this field, and my career is nowhere near long enough. We are not there yet. Ralph talked about the circumstances outside the United States where buses flip over and things are unsafe, and here we have the greatest tort system in the world, and here we have buses that flip over, and here we have Volkswagen and General Motors, and here we have DES, and here we have pharmaceuticals that cure and perform miracles and pharmaceuticals that kill. We are not done. And this museum is a testament, it's a point in time to where we are and where we need to go. It's looking backward with a hope that we can look forward. There are in this room also people who have tried hard, who are brilliant, to bring the system in balance. It's not a perfect system. Sometimes it goes really haywire. Judges are wrong, juries are wrong, things don't work exactly the way you think, because it's a system of people. 12 regular people in a jury, a judge who isn't necessarily an expert, making a decision affecting hundreds of millions of dollars and lives. Not always going to work out perfectly. But I know this, it works out better than any other system that we've conceived of or anyone else has conceived of. And so the people who are here, and I count them as my friends, who want to bring the system in balance, I salute you. I always have. Those who support tort reform, which of course gets a bad name in this museum, and it probably should given the nature of its founder, those who support tort reform aren't evil. They are sometimes as right as we are and as wrong as we are. We have a ways to go with tort law, and one of the things that makes it so important and so critical is it's all we got. It's what protects us. It's what protects you. When you go to bed tonight, when you get up in the morning, when the car you drive, your vehicle for transportation, when the gas you put in your car, when all of those things function, you can thank the tort system. You can thank the tort system. It's all around you. It's every part of you. It's what you eat, it's what you wear, it's the airplane you fly in, it's the road you drive in, it's the car that you're in. And in that sense, it becomes part of this national treasure. Here's a museum that enshrines that treasure, questions it, laughs at part of it, and tells us where we need to go. And I cannot think of a better way to spend a Saturday than to be with this group of great people who are here to celebrate this really remarkable system of justice. I hope that all of you get a chance to go through the museum. I also hope you buy my books. We all hope that you'll buy our books. But more than that, I hope you really engage in the world of tort law. And I don't care whether you think tort reform is a good idea or, like me, you oppose it, in which case you would be right. John Grisham, who made a fortune and is making a fortune writing about law and lawyers, wrote not long ago a book called The Litigator, a very uncomfortable read. He absolutely slams trial lawyers, class actions, multi-district panels, small firms, and I'm sorry to say he slams defense counsels as well. There's a little bit of self-loathing going on there. So John Grisham questions our legal system and he questions tort law. You should too. Get engaged, get involved, figure out where you are, and get yourself into our system of justice. Don't be an observer. The museum gives you a chance to observe. Be engaged. Get involved in lobbying. Find out what's going on with our tort system. Watch this upcoming Congress. Watch what happens when the parties begin to realign. Watch the legislation that comes out that takes away punitive damages, that forces down economic damages, pain and suffering, medical malpractice cases. Watch and get involved. And if you do, I think you will come away loving this stuff and being proud of it as I am and as this museum allows us to be. Thank you.